What's going on, guys? Flex Chapman here. Diablo 4 devs just did their Diablo 4 update for Season 2, their campfire chat, where they went through everything that's going to be coming out with the new season. I took the liberty of taking some notes as they were speaking, as well as kind of putting them in simpler terms, and then also organizing them in chronological order based on what I think is most important and related, all the way down to the tiny little details at the end that I think are also important to mention. So without further ado, let's just jump right on into this. So the thing I thought was the most important to start with was that they went over this gigantic item section that was specifically talking about items, but really addressed a lot of the problems that we as players have had. First and foremost, gems no longer exist. They already announced that. Instead, gems are going to drop as gem shards. These shards are going to not only be able to craft gems at the jeweler, but they're going to be salvageable, meaning that you can salvage your gems and then continuously recycle the resource. As far as the enchantment cost, they did address that as well, in which case that's going to be getting a large reduction. Now, what they said was your first enchant is going to have a slightly higher base cost, but the incremental jumps as you continuously attempt to enchant an item are going to be a bit smaller. One thing that I found to be very important was that crafting materials are now going to drop in place of gear that does not fit the world tier. Now that sounds complicated or confusing, but the easiest way to explain this is, if you are in World Tier 3, you are only going to get sacred gear. If something were to drop that is not sacred, it is just going to give you raw resources. Not only is this going to save time salvaging at the blacksmith, but it's also going to fill up your inventory for if you want to respec your class. This is massive. The same thing applies to World Tier 4. You are only going to get ancestral pieces, and they are not going to be retroactive. Everything lower than that, even sacred, is just going to be crafting material. This does not affect legendaries, so if you still need an aspect that's on a piece of gear, it will still drop for you, and you'll be able to do what you want with it at your discretion. Higher level monsters are now going to drop higher level gear. Now this is, shocker, oh my gosh, such crazy news, Blizzard's reinventing the wheel. This should have been here from the start of the game. I know what they were trying to do by making mobs feel easier as you got stronger, but they went a little bit too hard into that, especially considering the XP nerfs, and we'll talk about that later, but this is a great fix. At level 100, you'll be getting power level roughly 900 gear, which is a really big jump from where we're at right now. Increasing from that beyond level 100, every single level above 100 that the monsters are will give you an additional 1 level of power level to the gear that they drop, and they said that that's going to cap somewhere around 920. This is really good because as you continuously play the game, it is not like you will be finished leveling at level 70, but it is going to go all the way until you feel like your build is finished and complete and you can no longer push any further. There's also a few smaller things as far as those item power levels that they are starting to improve. Now, each of these I'm going to talk about a little bit further, but normal whisper catches from the Tree of Whispers will now provide items that have a plus 10 item power to where you are roughly at, or the content that you are finishing in that world tier. An upgraded cache will have a plus 20 item power level. For Hell Tides, their caches will always now provide plus 20 power level to the gear. I think that's pretty important. And now uniques will always drop the best version possible, meaning that if you get a unique at level 30, level 35, 40, and so on, every time you get it, it will be a better version than the one you previously got. That to me is really important, as it means that the gear progression is not going to slow you down, but you are always going to have pieces to chase for. Moving on to some quality of life things that they brought in here, the Scroll of Escape DC protection is now in for hardcore players, which means I have no excuse to not play hardcore in Season 2. I'm planning on a nice little sorcerer build, but we'll talk about that once we get a little bit closer. They also have given Incense the ability to boost experience differently than the potions and everything else. Now this is really, really important based on the next point. XP has been increased substantially. So what this means is that all bonuses to your experience points, 5% for potion, 5% for being in a group, 5% now from incenses, which I'm assuming that's going to be the rate of experience from incenses, all of those are now going to go into a bucket that is then going to be multiplied to your world tier. This is going to be massive for power leveling. This means that if you can get a new character level 5, pop a potion, somebody higher pops an incense, you already have your battle pass finished, and you get carried right into World Tier 3 or 4, you could potentially not hit level 50 in an hour, but maybe even 70 in an hour at these boosted experience rates. This is huge for alts, this is huge for just overall playstyle, and I think this is well overdue. The time that they quoted was that it is 40% overall faster to hit level 100. I don't know if that means from level 1, level 50, or from once you hit World Tier 4, but time will tell. We're only going to be able to see that as we go into it. Another small bonus to that I think is important, they already trickled this in with the last season, but now all bonuses in Renown are going to carry over season to season, meaning that you're not going to have to worry about catching up on Renown again. You are going to start with it fully maxed out if you've already done so, and that's just really nice for quality of life. I'm really glad they put that in. Now, when we talk about what's going to be coming in this endgame, they've gone over a few things, and I'm going to start by talking about the bosses because they spend some time detailing this. So for the endgame bosses, there's 5 new ones, I'm pretty sure overall. I think Lilith might still be included in that 5, but we're going to have 2 additional ones in World Tier 3, and all 5 are going to be available in World Tier 4. In World Tier 3, we're going to have Varshan, which is a little bit of a recycle from this season, but apparently he's going to have his own little malignant area. The malignant hearts are gone, but the lore is still there. In addition to that, there's also going to be someone called Gregor the Saint. That person is going to be somebody who has lightning abilities. He's essentially going to have that large knight build that you see sometimes in the earlier campaign, but a little bit different and specified to him. I am seeing my correction here now. In World Tier 4, we are having 3 bosses being added, so my apologies, it's going to be 6 endgame bosses overall. In Tier 4, we're going to have Beast in Ice, which is just a large ice beast. Self-explanatory. We're going to have Lord Zir, who is the main campaign boss of Season 2, and I think that's going to be interesting. Apparently, you beat him at the end of the campaign, and you also beat him again in World Tier 4 in his own instance, similar to the way you did with Lilith in the campaign. And then there's also Duriel, the King of Maggots, who you may remember from Diablo 2, and he is making a reappearance as the final boss. He's going to be on the exact same level as Lilith, and he is going to have a near guaranteed chance to drop Uber Uniques. He's going to be target farmable, and I think that's important. Now, something to note about all of these new bosses is that they are summonable. There are going to be resources that you are going to have to farm, and those resources, as you collect them, are going to give you the opportunity to challenge these bosses. One cool thing that they did mention in this dev update is that these are going to be tradable and sellable, meaning that if you have too many, you've already fought the boss, you got the stuff you wanted from them, you can just go ahead and sell to somebody else or even trade to a guildie the remaining resources that you have so that they could fight the boss on their own. Now, each of these bosses are also said to have their own unique loot table, not to drop uniques, but their own individual loot table that's going to have cosmetic rewards, it's going to have specialized gear rewards that are specific to that boss, so you will be able to target farm builds a little bit easier. But only Duriel's the one who is known specifically to drop Uber Uniques, so that is definitely something to keep in mind for the late game. Continuing on with the late game, we have a few endgame activities that are worth talking about a little bit more in detail. Now, we're going to talk more about nightmares later, but I did want to show here, nightmare sigils rewarded from Whispers are now going to be roughly 5 levels within the range of the highest completed sigil that you've done, meaning that if you've beaten a level 50 sigil, you can get anywhere from a 45 to a 55 and anywhere in that realm. It's going to be plus or minus 5 from the top that you've beaten. A big thing that they're really trying to push here is Whispers. They've talked about this substantially, but now Whispers are going to drop a significant portion of gold. They kept specifying this during the blog, basically stating that they really wanted everybody to know that Whispers are going to be your primary way of farming gold. It is now the way to do gold. They've also went ahead and increased the XP from Whispers and Helltide substantially. They said that this is so that people do not feel pigeonholed into doing nightmare dungeons as their only form of endgame content. Whisper caches will drop relevant items now, which I think is a very bonus. If you grab the one that is going to drop rings, then it shouldn't drop boots, and they've now corrected that. And Helltides also now show an icon of what is in the chest on your map. I think that's important because it'll help you kind of further navigate towards whether you need a chest piece or some pants. I did say I wanted to talk about the nightmare dungeons. For quality of life, teleporting to the nightmare dungeons when using the sigil will just take you right inside the dungeon. That's going to save a large amount of time and just make the overall pathing easier if you want to continuously chain them. The dungeon event monster density is going to be increased, meaning that if you're doing one of those small help me in a room or one of those health fonts that ends up being cursed, you're going to have many more monsters, and as they stated in the blog, they're going to be much harder. meaning that you're going to actually have to fight them more diligently to get the reward. That's good for experience points, it's good for the playability and how it feels to play it, so I'm pretty happy about that. They've also said that traps are now going to be more readable, and if you do get CC'd, it's going to be less damaging, meaning that the duration and the overall damage is going to be less. The Paragon Glyph experience points that you get at the end of the Nightmare Dungeon is going to be increased baseline. They said they want this to run directly in line with the 40% faster time to get to level 100, so we'll see how that scales out as we play through the season. They've also corrected a couple of the afflictions that you can get in the Nightmare Dungeons because there were a lot that people weren't choosing, rightfully so, and here are some of the ones that they said that they've corrected. For Backstabbers, they're now just going to apply Vulnerable when they attack you from behind. For Monster Critical Strike Resist, they're going to attack you and give themselves crit resist when they attack you. Gives you some option to play around that. If you can dodge some attacks, you may still be able to just crit them right from the start. Death Pulse will now prevent double Death Pulses and stacking Death Pulses, so if a monster was already going to explode, it's no longer going to explode twice, and they're not going to compile on top of each other. Lightning Storm now will have you get a 35% movement speed buff if you stand in the bubble, so that you're no longer penalized and slowing down your Nightmare Dungeons by continuously being in that track. And then the final one is Drifting Shade. The duration of that Drifting Shade smog is going down from 5 to 3 seconds, and the respawn time up by 2 seconds as far as how long it takes for another Drifting Shade to come chase you down. For the objectives and the layout, they also did say that they're going to be simplifying the objectives. Their quote is just to find the boss, and the goal of that is less backtracking, meaning that there are going to be in some dungeons just a straightforward path to the boss of Carnage. That reminds me a lot of some of the older Diablo games, so I really am excited to see how that plays, because everybody knows that if you go down a tunnel, you hook to the right, now there's bosses here, but maybe you took a wrong turn, you went back up to the door, but there's still one more boss, so now you're coming back. Apparently, the way that they've pathed it now is that there's something called the critical path. You will follow that, and that will inevitably lead you right up to the boss. Now, there's a couple of other things that they just briefly touched upon that I think we're going to definitely need some more details on, and these are things that kind of revolve around world events and just overall town feel. So, for starters, there's this new thing called the Blood Harvest. The Blood Harvest is going to be a Helltide-esque event that is no longer on a timer, but now a 24/7 moving timer, so it's always going to be in a zone. As soon as one ends, it's going to go to another zone. Essentially, this is the King's minions, the Lord Zir, and they're basically taking over an area. That's like the lore behind it. Essentially, what's going to happen is they're going to drop two primary things that you're interested in. One are called Bloodlures. I don't even know how to spell that. That's just what they said. And those are going to be basically things that allow you to create your own event inside the dungeon. So the same way that you might hit a cursed shrine, you are creating your own cursed shrine within that Helltide-esque event, the Blood Harvest. They're also going to drop vampire keys, and apparently these are going to be used to complete objectives, as well as open chests within that Blood Harvest, and really not much else. They talked about how some of the minions are now going to be reskinned with different things, have different attacks and abilities, and based on the way they play. I personally still think it's a bit lazy. Just create some new monsters. I know you have an art and development team. However, that's my own gripe to have. Cool that they reskinned them, cool they have new abilities, but nothing really is changing there. There is also now the Hunter's Acclaim Journey board, which is an in-town board. It's essentially a mini battle pass board that rewards you as you continue on in the campaign and killing vampires along your path. It gives you things like gear, cosmetics, your new abilities, the vampire abilities, as well as a new resource, Potent Blood, which is going to be the thing that allows you to get these new vampire abilities. They briefly touched upon it. I think they're going to talk about it a little bit more with the next dev update where they talk about characters and classes, but we'll have to see exactly what those abilities entail and how they function. For world events, Legion events are going to be now reduced for the time on their rotation, so down from 30 minutes to every 25 minutes. The warning timer is going to be increased from 5 to 10 minutes, meaning you have more time to know they're coming, more time to get there, and there's easier map navigation, so it doesn't look so close when it's on your mini-map. They're basically doing the same thing with world bosses, but they're doing it much larger scale, and I think that's awesome. World boss spawns are now reduced by nearly half, so they're going from a 6-hour spawn to a 3.5-hour spawn, which is great. You get a 1-hour warning timer, so you have plenty of time in advance, and 15 minutes before every player is going to get an alert, the same way we did on our phones today, letting them know that they're going to be able to do the world boss in 15 minutes, which is plenty enough time to wrap up a nightmare dungeon, salvage some gear, and prepare for the boss. Now, there are a couple of smaller things that have to do with the UI and the UX, a couple of things revolving around mounts and towns, so let's go ahead and dive into those. I don't necessarily mean that they are small in the sense of their impact, but I do mean that they are small compared to the large changes to gearing in nightmare dungeons. Starting with the UI, items can now be marked junk or favorite. So favorite basically works as the opposite to junk, meaning that if you salvage or sell all of your gear, those are just going to stay in your inventory as a way to safeguard your loot. Your extracted aspects will be grouped together when your inventory is sorted, meaning that if you have 5 of the same aspect in your inventory, as soon as you hit sort, they're all going to stay next to each other for easier comparison. So there is another small bonus of the UI, which is that the sorting of the affixes on normal gear are just going to present more consistently. Basically, all this means is that if strength is the third modifier in a piece of gear, for all pieces of gear across the board, strength will always be the third modifier. This just makes it easier when looking left to right. The strength isn't here on this piece, here on this piece, and here on this piece. You kind of got to put the pieces together. The dungeon map tooltips will show if it has a whisper, meaning that if you are doing a dungeon, but there is a whisper active for it, you will still see that it is your nightmare dungeon. You'll still be able to go to that from the map without the whispers getting in the way. That's just kind of a fix rather than an update, but sure. There are a couple of big ones coming up next, and I did want to save them towards the end of the video, so pay close attention. The stash can now be searched and filtered. Now, this is not a small search and filter, but actually pretty in-depth. I played last Epoch where they have a massive stash filtering system, and it seems like Diablo's taking a lot of note from that and applying it to the game. You can sort things by whether they're unique, legendary, yellow, rare, the type of gear it is. You can search for in a specific aspect, and it'll show you how many of that aspect are in each of your boxes. And seeing as we're not going to have gems nor malignant hearts clogging up our stash space, and all of our unnecessary gear is going to immediately turn into raw resources, this is going to mean that we're going to have way more access to our stash, way more availability for the gear, and not only that, it's going to be easier to filter through it, which I think is genius. I think it's Blizzard exactly doing what they need to do for Diablo 4. A couple of other things as well. They added streamer mode, which is small, and they also added the ability to hide combat text like vulnerability, dodge, or fortified from flying up on your screen. I personally am never really bothered by it unless I'm doing super high nightmares, so sure. But this one is really, really cool. They added auto run. Now you might say auto run, oh my god, so my horse is going to be running into the same clip on the wall for 2 hours? No, because they've also fixed the mounts. They said that the mounts are now less likely to get stuck overall, and they jump intuitively, meaning that if you come up to a barrier, or you come up to something that is to stop you, or you come up to one of those gaps that you cross, your horse will just instinctively know that that is meant to jump that item. They also increased the horse's base speed up to 14% and the duration of your boost up to 50%, meaning that when you use your boost, it's not only going to be half as longer, but it's also going to be faster in general, and I think that's pretty good. For mouse and keyboard, they did update the ability to not need to drag your cursor all the way to the edge of the screen to still get the exact same benefits and buffs as console players using the mounts. And they've also helped with some cooldown reductions for the mount, so when you dismount, you can get back on faster. If you use your combat dismount, you can get back on faster. If a monster hits you off, you can still get back on faster. So the whole point is that you can get back to your mount as fast as possible with less delay in between, just more quality of life. For towns and vendors, there again are a few small things that are quality of life updates. You're now going to find the occultist at the Tree of Whispers, and I think this is really, again, I mentioned it earlier, Diablo 4 really incentivizing the Tree of Whispers as a feature of the game. If you're like me and you played all of Season 0 and Season 1, you'll know that Whispers are really not that important. They never have been. They've always just been something that's there. They're not really that useful for gearing. They weren't really that useful for gold. They were kind of okay for experience points if you were close to leveling up. But other than that, you didn't really go out of your way to do normal dungeons or in-world events because the Whispers were pretty much useless. They're really trying to change that to be a gigantic gold and XP farm, and now that they're guaranteed to give you gear upgrades of the specific sort that you ask for, I think that we might have to give them a further chance or a second try moving into Season 2. They are putting stashes everywhere, so stashes are now going to be multiple in town, and they said one guaranteed at pretty much every waypoint, which I think is important. Meaning that if you're running Nightmare Dungeons, you don't have to go all the way back to Kilvashad, take care of all your stuff, then go all the way back. And then when you're in Kilvashad, you don't have to go all the way into that room. There's going to be stashes all over so that you can easier access your inventory and loot. This is also important because that means that you're now going to be loading player stashes everywhere, so you better have a 4090 or you won't be able to play So they also moved the Obel vendor closer, which I think is really cool. So now the Obel vendor won't be on the outskirts of every town, but rather more central for the player's ease of access. And then finally, to wrap up the video, they did end with something that I am very tentative about, which is that they are releasing Diablo 4 on Steam. This is tentative for me because we saw what happened with Overwatch. However, they are announcing plenty of really healthy changes for Diablo 4, and it's also going to open up the availability for players to play without needing Battle.net login or anything else. Steam Deck on the go, that might be a really fun way to play Diablo. And that's the wrap up for this week. They really didn't go too crazy into all the details as far as what's happening because again, they already announced they're doing 2 of these. For me, I think this is really interesting. Just a few days ago, I released a video saying 5 things Diablo needs to fix before Season 2, and they've addressed quite a few of the issues that I brought up in that video. They've made a lot of the open world activity have value to it. They've increased the UI and organized the stashes so that you weren't as concerned as far as your space and limited space, and they've also given you the ability to look specifically for places to get gear to help your builds. Now, they did tease near the end that they were looking into potentially having a reset all Paragon button, but no words yet. That was their words, not mine, so we'll have to see what comes of that. If you got this far, I really appreciate it. Like the damn video, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.